Well, the world is a complex place. We've been hearing that the last 2 days, and all of us who are researchers know that, and all of us who live in the world know that. But science proceeds basically by simplifying, generally. You have to simplify. You have to choose which variables are going to be in your model. You have to choose whether they enter the model linearly or quadratically or in some other way. You have to choose whether they interact with each other or whether each works on its own, because that's the way science produces hypotheses or predictions that are potentially refutable. And that's the way science directs the collection of data, because you can't collect everything. You have to collect whatever the hypotheses and the theory and the model suggest are important. And it's this simplification that also makes it possible for scientists eventually to talk to policymakers, because you can't tell policymakers you have to change everything at once right now. You have to give them some kind of priorities, which in the case of science go back through the data, back through the models, back to the theory, which makes a simplification of reality. However, in the last 20 or 30 years, until quite recently, both macroeconomists, on the one hand, and people who study the environment, on the other hand, among their simplifications have made one that we know now is turning out to be rather costly, and that is the simplification that every human being is the same. And so all we need to do in models of macroeconomics and in models of the environment and climate change is count the people, count the numbers, count the heads, count the arms and divide by 2, however, count the people. This has led to considerable progress, but it's also a simplification that has led to problems and has led to puzzles, both in macroeconomics and in the study of environment and ecology and climate change. And as you might think, here at IIASA and organizations closely associated with IIASA here in the Vienna area, it's here principally in the world, not entirely, but principally where that simple assumption about the human agent being something that you can simply count has been broken down. First broken down into, well, let's at least assign them a sex, 1 or 2, and an age, 5-year age groups. This began quite a long while ago at IIASA here in the World Population Program, nearly at the beginning of IIASA, with methods, mathematical, demographic, technical methods to take account of these, at least these characteristics of the human agent and how we differ. More recently here at IIASA, we have begun to take account not only of that, but of other characteristics of human beings that we know are responsible for differences in the way policies work, differences in the way people react, the way people prepare for disaster, for environmental change, and the way they react to it when it comes. And in particular, we're paying very special attention to the role not only of the numbers of people and their gender and their ages, but their education, their cognitive functioning, their attitudes and behavior toward risk, the accesses that they have to savings and to credit, and things of this kind that distinguish poor people from rich people, distinguish women from men, particularly in the developing world, distinguish children from adults, so that it's not just where people live and what their gender is and what their age is, but it's the characteristics that economists and now many others call human capital, and the process that produces this human capital, which is an investment process. Economists, and we've locked the doors so you can't leave, but all of us up here speaking to you today are economists. And as I say, there's no escaping now that I've told you that. But economists use the term human capital to include it in the concept of capital. And capital is something that is produced at a cost and yields a stream of benefits over time. Very simple. You withhold from current consumption to produce something that doesn't give you anything right now, but will produce a stream of benefits. Perhaps it's income, perhaps it's a better life, perhaps it's satisfaction over time. And the kinds of human capital that we'll be talking about here today are the ones principally that I just listed: education, formal and informal, on-the-job training, health, and we'll be talking about it in macro and cognitive functioning. We'll be talking about it both in macro dimensions and in micro dimensions with data and modeling of several different kinds. And so what we're doing is we're complicating this relatively simple model in a systems approach, in the kind of way that IIASA concentrates on and has made headway on, to try to open up the process and produce even more hypotheses, predictions that are refutable, even more guidance for the collection and merging of data, and eventually even more guidance for policymakers. Our three speakers today are Dr. Reinhard Mechler, Dr. Vigard Skierbeck, and Dr. Jesus Crespo Quaresma. And as I say, all three are economists. I'm just going to say a word about each one because they're described in your program, and I don't want to take time away. And then I'm not going to stand up and introduce them after they speak. Just when one finishes, the next one will get up. And when they're done, if you have some immensely burning question that won't take more than 7 seconds for a person to answer, you could stick that in the middle, but it should be a clarification question that you just can't proceed without knowing the answer to. Because other than that, with the three speakers and the length of the session, we're going to have plenty of time for discussion between you and the speakers and me, between you and yourselves, and between the speakers. And I also want to introduce Dr. Marcin Sonowski, who is our rapporteur today, who can also claim mainly to be a demographer, but I think we can call you an economist as well. So both. And in fact, really all of us are economists and demographers. So let me begin with Reinhard. Reinhard is an economist. He leads the group on disasters and development here at IIASA, and his interests are widespread. They include catastrophe risk modeling, longer-term impacts of disasters and climate change on development, the use of novel risk financing mechanisms, such as microfinance, which we've all heard of, but others as well, and the assessment of the efficiency and equity of risk management and adaptation measures. Following Reinhard, we'll be listening to Vigard Skierbeck. Vigard is an economist as well, has published widely. He heads the Age and Cohort Change Group at IIASA, and the things that he has been studying and publishing on include fertility, the demography of skills and beliefs, multi-state population projections, particularly including cognitive health and religion, age and cohort variation in demographic behavior and retirement dynamics. And he's the leader of a major project here at IIASA. And finally will be our colleague, Dr. Jesus Crespo. And Jesus, also an economist, is here at IIASA and also professor of economics in the Vienna University of Economics and Business. And Jesus has worked in applied macroeconomics, actually applied macroeconometrics, the statistical application of the tools, economic growth forecasting, business cycle research, and monetary and fiscal policy. And so you will not be hearing the entire range of what they work on, but I think you'll be hearing a range to indicate that economists not only study many different things, but in fact, we hope, have some different opinions about what they're studying. We'll see about that. Reinhard.